So now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce today's first speaker, Menaka Gopinath, Head of Ipsos' Social Intelligence Practice. Menaka, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ellen, and hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. As Ellen mentioned, my name is Menaka. I lead our online communities and social intelligence practice in the U.S., and I'm really excited to be joined by two of my colleagues who I will let introduce themselves as well. Jennifer?
Hi, I'm Jennifer Torgerson, and I'm on our online community team, and I oversee our syndicated research.
Hi, I'm Jordan Massa, and I am on our social intelligence team, and I also have been working on our syndicated research.
Great. So when the two of them talk about the syndicated research that we've been working on, essentially since March, since COVID hit the US, we have been using both our social intelligence dashboards as well as our syndicated community to really get a greater understanding of how people are living through this pandemic. And that's what we're going to talk to you about today, is what we're seeing as we look forward to the fall and beyond, and how people are really recalibrating for the COVID marathon. So we're going to jump into the deck, and we're going to take our videos off because we wanted to make sure you saw our pretty faces, but then we will jump into the actual content. So bear with us real quick. Okay, so let's jump into the agenda. Okay, so today what we're going to talk to you about is how people are feeling right now. Loaded question, I think. How people are planning for the long haul, as I mentioned, recalibrating for what we're calling the COVID marathon. And then we'll end with how brands can help people today, which I think is really, there's a lot of different ways that brands have been helping, and we'll dig into some of those areas in more detail as we look forward. As Ellen mentioned, if we have time for questions, we'll definitely address those at the end. If not, we will absolutely follow up, and we always love talking to all of you, so please reach out so we can engage beyond today. All right, so if you go to the next slide. So since late March, like I mentioned, we've been tracking the COVID-19 emotional journey through a framework that was developed by our advisory team, Strategy 3, called the Ipsos Pandemic Adaptability Continuum, or IPAC. And it's really given us a framework in which to understand the dynamic phases people are going through, the emotions linked to those phases, and just give us some kind of structure to understand how people are, like I said, living through this pandemic. But if we go to the next slide, similar to this popular meme you might see on the right, the continuum has really proven to be quite dynamic and oftentimes confusing. There are so many different emotions that people are feeling: anxiety, depression, and just prioritizing what's important and what we need to do to get through the day is a daily struggle. As you can see here from this data point, over half of us are feeling more stressed, anxious, and/or depressed during this pandemic, and a third even admit they've felt like they are losing their mind. So just being able to put how we're feeling into words can be difficult these days. You're good, Jennifer. You can go to the next slide. And so there's clearly many things contributing to these overwhelming feelings of anxiety and depression. I'm sure all of you just are living this real time. I don't need to reiterate it, but just to give context to setting the stage here, obviously we are living through an ongoing pandemic, and in the last week we surpassed a really horrible milestone of exceeding 200,000 deaths. We have the upcoming presidential elections with huge implications, and with the debate the other night, obviously a lot of fear and anxiety coming out of that. We are in the midst of a racial justice movement and speaking out against systemic inequities. We're in the midst of a climate crisis, natural disasters impacting the whole country. I myself am in California, so the wildfires have been pretty scary here. And to top it off, it's fall. And for many, seasonal depression is real, and the darker days coming really will be coupled with the darker moods as well. And we can see this also in our essentials data, where we found that 76% of Americans feel like things in the US are out of control right now. I don't know if any of you saw the video back in the day when COVID started from Cardi B, but what she said back then with coronavirus getting real is definitely not a joke. So let's take it back to the IPAC. What you're seeing on this slide is looking at kind of the evolution of phases compared to the beginning of summer to now. So if you look at mid-May and where people were at, we see that there's a lot more anticipation at the beginning of the summer. People were kind of looking forward to reopening and getting through this virus. And if you look to where we are now, that anticipation has really closed up. And we've also been able to see that as we look at the cases in the US, that also has some implications on the phases that people are in, whereas there might be more of the later phases of recalibration, exploration, opening up as the cases are smaller or lower per day. We're seeing that as they go up, there's more movement back into acclimation and adjustment. But overall, you can probably tell here that that orange and turquoise chunk is really dominant. For most of us, we're continually adjusting and acclimating to this because of this very stressful time. So in the social conversation, we've been looking at the coronavirus conversation since March. And since the very beginning where it spiked in mid-March, you can see that kind of the highest point here, it really has been on a steady decline. And when we really dug into that decline, it's not necessarily because people aren't talking about the pandemic, rather it's become normalized into our daily lives. It's something we're living with. It's part of our everyday. We don't need to outright say COVID or coronavirus. And similarly to the previous slide, we also see slight upticks in conversation when the cases are on the rise and vice versa. So essentially, if it's getting bad, it becomes more top of mind. When it gets a little better, we put it out of our minds. And we're seeing this reflected in the social conversation, though it has normalized to a much lower conversation volume than it was in earlier days. On the next slide, you can see here that we're looking at the subtopics in the coronavirus conversation, and we've been doing that since March. When we look at, again, from the context of the conversation at the beginning of the summer in May versus the conversation today in September, I guess today is the first day of October, we're seeing that the conversation is really dominated by things that are creating a lot of divide in our country right now. So the elections, how fast a vaccine could come, the economy, wanting to travel, the divide on wearing a mask, and things that were really more about the direct impacts of the pandemic have declined quite a bit. So things like the essential workers who are still working very hard to fight this pandemic, the delivery services that we rely on, working from home, and deaths. You know, like I mentioned, we surpassed this horrible milestone. And at the beginning, when we were tracking the conversation, everyone was talking about the deaths. That was the biggest conversation topic that we saw. And now it's definitely a smaller portion of that share of voice. So the dominance of the topics we're seeing in social conversation really do reiterate the great divide in America today. Another view of this divide can be seen from the perspective of our IPAC. So what you're seeing here is we looked at a core group of people in our community that we had responses from the beginning of May through the middle of September, where they answered the IPAC question, so the battery of questions that placed them in a phase. And essentially what we wanted to do is track a static respondent group through the different phases over time. We found pretty quickly that there were two unique groups. Where there was the group of people that just really were stuck in the same phases and didn't really move much into other phases. And then there was a much more volatile group that moved from phase to phase quite a bit and more freely. Across both, you see that fatigue is a big piece of the emotional state of all of us. But we do see that there's a lot more fear and anger for those that are just not moving from phase to phase, and a lot of the people stuck in kind of acclimation, versus more gratitude and optimism for those that are shifting phases. So it just further reiterates this divide we're seeing. It's not just partisan, but in how people are navigating their lives in the midst of this pandemic and the feelings that come with that experience. So I'm going to pass it over to Jordan to dig into this a bit more.
Yes, so as Manika was saying, when we also took a look at the emotions coming through from the social conversation, comparing the beginning of summer to now, we actually see that right now you see these big chunks of fear and anger really coming through. And those have really grown since the beginning of summer at the expense of optimism and these feelings of being grateful. And as you can see by this very illustrative meme on the side here, at this point, the beginning of this pandemic to now, we've been dealing with a lot more than just COVID itself, right? We have a lot that's being thrown at Americans, at all of us. And so that's really been increasing that sense of fear and anxiety that people are feeling. And important to note here too that this is not just based off of COVID mentions, this is actually the mentions of people talking about their lifestyle and their experiences that they've been dealing with over these past few months. So the thing is though, wherever you fall on this spectrum of personal impacts and beliefs, this sense of fear and anger is very real and tangible. And so how people are really finding their way through this is by activating, actually, could you go back, Jennifer? Sorry. Thank you. So that people are really activating on this sense of calm to get through this time. So even though internally we all may be feeling these increases in fear and anger, outwardly, Americans are really doing their best to channel this sense of calm as a way to get through this time. So when we looked at the social, we saw that increase of fear and anger, but when we actually asked the community how they're feeling, they're all, we see people experiencing that they're feeling an increased sense of calm. So then something that's helping people get through this time where we're thinking about the future is this idea of keeping an eye on what's going on with the vaccines. And people are looking at that really as the signal to how we're going to end this pandemic. But there is even some tension in this topic as well. A lot of people are feeling skeptical about this rapid race to get to a vaccine. So you actually do see the majority of Americans are indicating that they'll wait at least 3 months before they get the vaccine themselves, with some minorities on either end of that spectrum saying that they are going to be first in line, or even being saying that they don't even want to get it when it does come out. So all of that is really just adding up to make this end, the quote unquote end, really hard for people to see, or for many Americans to even really understand what that would look like. So that's just really contributing to this idea. We don't know when it's going to end. So now, which is much different from the beginning when we were all like, okay, we're going in quarantine back in March. I don't think the majority of us thought we'd be here in October still talking about it like this. So how are Americans really preparing for this long haul? So the way that we're really starting to think about this long haul is we're seeing it come up in 3 different ways, that across all the different ways of coping and preparing, people are primarily trying to find comfort, stay connected, and get productive. So right now, the approaching fall, really that is synonymous with all the cozy comfort things that we all like to do. So where the summer was all about enjoying the outdoors, staycations, camping, or even just making the most of your own backyard or balcony, gearing up for fall now is bringing in all of the cozy comfort vibes. So as the temperature is dropping, what people are looking forward to doing this fall, we see a lot of food coming through. So we're baking our fall treats, getting ready to try all your fall recipes, and also trying to enjoy those last bits of beautiful weather outside, whether that's grilling or hiking, sitting around a fire pit. But primarily what we're seeing is a lot of conversation about food. Food has really been the comfort aspect. I mean, even in the beginning of the pandemic with the sourdough starters, focaccia bread, like I know I was doing all of that. Food has very much helped me get through the pandemic, and it's great to see I'm not alone. So when we look at the fall, it's really, you know, time to get out that crock pot, get out that Instant Pot. We're making soups, chilies, and stews, but we're really also seeing pumpkin. Pumpkin spice is really got everybody excited. In fact, we see that the social mentions of pumpkin spice are up almost 20% year over year. Starbucks even released their pumpkin cream cold brew and pumpkin spice lattes earlier than they released them any other year. And so we're even seeing, you know, this transition from pumpkin spice lattes to just like pumpkin spice everything. And then beyond food, the other ways that people are finding comfort and even connection and a sense of productivity is from the different ways that we're keeping ourselves entertained at home. So gaming has actually become this like breakout star for the ways that people are coping at home, and that really is providing all three of those things. You know, there's a comfort to playing these games as well as being able to connect to your loved ones and even feel that sense of accomplishment of, you know, getting through a game or a really hard level, or even learning how to play games in general. We've seen a lot of new audiences coming to video games and digital platforms in general. Additionally, you know, the binge watching has maintained a steady conversation, but we've also seen a big conversation around different DIY and creative activities, whether that's home decorating, home organizing, or even breaking out, you know, paint sets and just doing something to feel creative and productive. These are all ways that people are really helping get through this time. So I'm now going to pass it over to Jennifer to keep talking about how Americans are coping.
Hi. So as we've looked at parents, we've seen that COVID has really increased the focus on well-being for their children, as you know, they've been forced to find new ways to not only keep the kids busy, but also to make sure that they're getting socialization and, you know, getting the education that they need. So we saw prior to the school year starting a lot of fear and anxiety regarding it, a lot of concerns over what it would be like safety-wise, what they might bring home, how it would go, just a lot of uncertainty leading to a lot of fear and anxiety. And that is still existing even though school is underway. But what we're seeing now that parents have had a chance to see it start, whether it be virtual or in person, you know, there's a little more relaxation coming in, and we're seeing more gratitude, a feeling of calmness and more optimism. There's still, you know, again, concern, but there is, you know, the upside coming through. And then as the school year is in progress, now consumers are able to kind of shift their mindset away from prepping for that to thinking about fall and the holidays. And it's leaving, you know, many wondering, will the holidays be canceled? What will it look like? And, you know, what we're seeing is that while some are, you know, having to skip their normal activities, we are seeing, you know, that they're still finding ways to get into the spirit and still determined to find those ways. We're hearing people say things like, you know, we need to have something to look forward to. And while the holidays may be different, it will still bring good memories. And just, you know, they're still preparing for the holidays as a way to have that hope and normalcy that they crave. And then, so as people are starting to, you know, think about gathering for the holidays, it's bringing up, you know, starting to think about moving from social distancing to distant socializing and what that will mean for people. So since the states reopened, we've been tracking monthly to see kind of where people are comfortable going. And what we've seen is that grocery stores have been the top place that people feel safe at. You know, we've seen 7 in 10 saying they feel comfortable going there every single month. And so, you know, that's kind of set the standard, I think, for people for their view of what is safe. And so we're seeing this kind of come through in how they're creating their rules. You know, if it's how many people are there? Are people taking it seriously? So are people wearing masks? And, will the location be indoor or out? That also has impacted where they feel safe going. And then we're also, seeing that a lot of this hesitation to socialize with crowds is really driven by unknowns and a lack of trust in people. And, a lot of it is that there have been so many and continue to be so many unknowns related to the pandemic that people are just leaning into what and who they know as a way of feeling safe and comfortable. So they want to go, 50% are comfortable gathering with people they know, but when you bring in any unknown person or unknown parameter, that's where people start to hesitate and, not nearly as comfortable. And we're seeing the sentiment coming through regarding, the familiarity and wanting things that are known with the holidays also. And in this regard, it's more that, parents don't necessarily know how they're going to celebrate, but that they know that they want to. They want to give their kids some kind of traditions, whether it be traditions they've always had, or maybe this year it'll be new traditions. And we're seeing, this especially among younger parents being more open to creating new traditions. And you probably have seen this meme of the candy slide, but with Halloween being first up, many are trying to get creative in how they're going to celebrate it this year. So we've seen things like drive-by trick-or-treating, putting a bucket in the driveway and then standing back so kids can still say trick or treat to you, but they can get their candy safely. Making decorations, baking, holiday themed entertainment are some of the things that we're seeing people try to do to try to keep that holiday spirit going. And then, as we start to think beyond Halloween and getting into the holiday season and like the gift giving and the spending that comes with it, we're seeing, just a feeling of kind of uncertainty leading consumers to, in their mind, plan that they're going to spend less this year just because they, just aren't sure what it's going to be like. But we're also seeing that because there's also going to be less occasion to spend. So many are feeling like parties are going to be canceled. They won't have as many gatherings. They might not fly to visit family, so they won't necessarily need to buy them a gift. And things like that are leading to it. We're also seeing people, feeling like, expensive gifts may not be appropriate. And we're seeing kind of a momentum towards thinking about, making gifts and doing more of those smaller type things this year. And then that lines up with another sentiment that we're seeing on how people are getting through the long haul. And it's with this feeling of needing to be productive and feeling productive. And so we're seeing a new focus with people that as they're looking back on, the initial stay at home and the fun days of, just catch up on everything you haven't been able to do previously, watching all your shows, reading all your books, those days are kind of over as people are now feeling like I need to feel productive. I need to feel like I'm achieving something every day because this is now becoming a way of life. And so we're seeing, this craving for accomplishment, and we're seeing it come through with consumers creating new routines, trying to eat healthier, setting new goals. It's also coming through with physical activity. We're seeing people, 23% saying they're more active. And some of this is due to, having that gift of time with maybe not having a commute now with work from home. And then others are looking at physical activity as just a way to distract and again, give that sense of productivity, like I've done something, and just, kind of get those endorphins going. And so, we're just seeing this as a new way of merging into self-care for people. And so we're seeing, people think of self-care beyond just, the going holistic and thinking of it being both mental and physical well-being and doing, everything kind of cohesively going together. Like this quote we have here is somebody who, just intermingles it all, like the stress and physical activity, and together reducing stress and increasing the physical activity will help to lead to that sense of, well-being. And then we're seeing this self-care desire and, importance come through as people think about the flu shot for this year. We're seeing about 20% considering getting it this year who maybe haven't in the past. And one of the drivers of that is, they want to do the right thing, want to make sure that they are, helping to keep others safe, and then also to keep from overwhelming the medical system and, just willing to get over that fear of needles this year and do that extra step just to try to, feel safer this year. And then now I'll turn over to Menaka to talk about brands.
Thank you, Jennifer. So I think what we'll end on kind of how can brands help people in the context of everything you just saw. If you go to the next slide, Jennifer. So we are definitely in a time where people feel like businesses and brands are doing a better job to help with recovery from the pandemic than the government. That also ladders to other data points we have that show that people trust the information coming from brands more than they trust the government, and just an overall decline in trust in the government as well. So clearly brands have a role in helping to make things better. A big part of that is helping people to maintain optimism in the midst of the crazy and really addressing those three areas that Jordan and Jennifer just talked about. So how can we find comfort, stay connected, and get productive? And this is important for many verticals, for every verticals, right? It's not just limited to certain verticals. We're seeing this requirement for brands to be actively part of the solution across multiple verticals. For example, 73%, and this is from a recent study we did with media development did on the post-purpose role for brands, but 70% or 73% expect financial services to help with money management strategies. This is a core element of finding comfort, right? If we have money to stay comfortable, and we see that in our community when we talk about how do you feel about your finances, if people have means, if they have savings, they feel more comfortable. How can financial services companies help them with that? Over 70% expect tech platforms to enforce standards of behavior and censor misleading content. These are ways tech companies can help people stay connected safely. I've heard from multiple people who have deleted their Facebook account or avoid Facebook because they don't want to get in an argument with their family members, right? The technology, the things that are being pushed out on tech platforms have an impact on how we feel and how we're able to stay connected. And then 80% expect healthcare companies to educate people on how to lead more healthy lifestyles. You saw Jennifer shared that we're seeing people have regrets. They feel like they weren't doing as much. They weren't as productive. They could be more healthy. They want to eat healthier. They want to do more activity. They want to do more exercise. How can healthcare companies help educating people in the context of leading more healthy lifestyles and what that looks like holistically? At the foundation of a brand's role today is safety. So Jennifer mentioned this in the context of where people are comfortable going. Safety is really the biggest driver. And since we've been looking at brand trust and what drives consideration and purchase intent in the midst of COVID, safety has really been at the top of the list and remained there. It's what gives people peace of mind to find some normalcy in their lives. And you can see the brands being called out are very much laddering to the areas that Jennifer mentioned, like over 70% feel comfortable going to grocery stores. And I think a lot of that is because they've been so vigilant in defining and executing against these safety precautions. So you can see that coming through with Amazon, Walmart, Target, Kohl's, like a lot of these retail brands coming through. And you can also see from this data point, I think it's interesting that we're seeing, close to 40% feel that if there was a universal mask mandate, that will make things feel normal again. The one above that was getting a vaccine, which we talked about earlier. So our work is also revealing how new challenges continue to create new opportunities for brands to be helpful. So I don't expect you to read what is in the middle of this slide, but it's really to give you some context on how we looked at this. We used learning from our community work, right? We honed in on the key challenges, the tensions that were coming up in our conversations and then the dialogue there. And then we took that and looked at the social conversation. As Jordan mentioned, we've been looking at lifestyle conversation, and we looked at this in the past month, from August 24th to September 20th. And what we really wanted to hone in on is how people are finding solutions to these challenges, and what could that kind of bring up as opportunities for brands. So we've touched on some of these already. For example, celebrations, right? We know that people are really trying to rethink how to approach the holidays this year, and creating new traditions or adapting new traditions so they can create some sense of normalcy and that feeling of comfort. So Jennifer mentioned the candy slide. We're seeing a lot of mentions of scavenger hunts, different ways to make quote unquote trick-or-treating safe and still fun for kids. Another one, and I can definitely relate to this one, is most of us are working from home. Our kids are doing virtual learning. This is increasing screen time. We're seeing that there's lots of eye strain, and we saw that come up organically in the conversation. Blue light glasses and the screen covers, those purchases are on the rise, right? That's a very clear solution that is not something necessarily that people were prioritizing pre-COVID. And we know from Ipsos research that 87% of consumers intend to keep using a new category they tried as a result of the pandemic. So continuing to really stay close to the conversation, the evolving tensions and challenges, and the ways to provide solutions to that now will definitely have a long-term impact for brands. In advertising, we're also seeing these ideas of comfort and connection reiterated. So our creative excellence team asked a question: how do you want brands to make you feel during this year's seasonal events? And you can see that togetherness really topped the list. Family togetherness, feeling connected. And then comfort and reassurance is on there as well, right? Feeling that comfort, feeling reassured that things are going to be okay. That hope, that optimism, those are really big things that people want to feel from brands. And hope for the future is really a big area we see for brands today, right? You can go to the next slide, Jennifer. Going back to the point I said earlier, where the brand, like people are trusting brands more than the government. They're thinking that brands are doing more in the recovery. Brands in some way are people's hope for a better future. And today more than ever, people really expect brands to take a stance in response to hateful or discriminatory content. They'll make opinions and use their dollars for brands based on the type of stance they take. More than ever, people are very heightened sense of what is the brand doing, what are the stances they're taking, and that having an impact on their wallet. So if you go to the next slide, why is brands taking a stand so important today? Well, what you're seeing here is we asked our community members, what do we need to build a better future? That was the question. It was open-end. It was a co-creation exercise. And you can see here that the largest chunk of the pie was the social element, particularly being kinder, more compassionate, supporting and caring about each other. People feel more than anything else that being better people will help us move towards a better future. So what does that mean for a brand? If you go to the next slide, brands play a huge part in this process. I've showed this slide in a couple of webinars because I love this slide so much, but what you're seeing here is we asked our community members early on in COVID in April, why are brands standing out in the midst of COVID? We asked the same question later in June in response to the Black Lives Matter movement and the death of George Floyd. Why are brands standing out in the context of their response to Black Lives Matter? And when we did text analytics on the open-end responses, and we looked at kind of the mental network of those responses and the similarities, the bi-mental network similarities in the middle there, you can see exactly what I was just saying. It comes down to humanity, caring about people, about the community, being supportive. So the same elements people see as critical to having a better future are elements that they are seeing in brands that are standing out. So clearly brands have a powerful role to play in the bridge to better. So to wrap up today's conversation, I wanted to leave you with 5 areas brands have clear opportunities as we look forward to a better future and helping people make it work through what we're calling this marathon of COVID. And the first really builds on the points I just mentioned, which is social focus. And when I say social focus, it's really this context of building greater empathy. We see that people themselves feel they need to be better to build back better, and they expect brands to be better and support people. So just thinking about all the different ways that a brand can be supportive. Even in the context of, like, I'll tell you from a research perspective, the other day we were talking through a questionnaire, a post-debate questionnaire, and we were talking through what should we ask people, and I was like, what would you want to be asked after that? That was a tiring debate, so just even thinking about that context as we're thinking about what we're doing as brands and the offering and services that we're delivering to people. Health is another area. We've seen in our research that even in the countries that have really strong public health systems, there's just everything is being pushed to its limits. And we saw that, early on in the US, that many brands came into play to deliver PPE, to build ventilators, to make hand sanitizer. So clearly a wide variety of brands have things that they can provide in that context and play a role in really creating a better system or sense of systems for healthcare. And that doesn't necessarily just land in the traditional healthcare vertical, right? So you saw earlier, there's an expectation for education and a healthy lifestyle. That can go well beyond just healthcare brands as well. Environment is another piece. This is a really big piece of tension right now, right? Because we're trying to be germ-free, but in the same context, we're in a climate crisis. So, things like buying things that are have more plastic on them, or trying to avoid single-use plastics, right? That's a real tension for people right now. And how can brands kind of help be part of the solution and part of the change, not part of the problem? And then the last 2 I'll say are just, more high level in the context of guiding policy change for good. There are things that, we're seeing, like I said, in our research, that there's a growing distrust in the government. And behind many government policies are corporations. So how can brands kind of take a stand for policies that do support people over profit? We're seeing that as a dominating conversation point right now. And then lastly, the economy. Our Ipsos Global Trends work noted earlier this year that globally, 76% of people feel that large income differences are bad for society. 74% feel economies are rigged to support the rich and powerful. How can brands have a place in wealth redistribution? How can brands focus purpose on utility for society? These are real problems that people are facing right now, especially as we look at an unknown future for the pandemic, and having to really kind of create ways to survive through that. So I think the last point I'll make is that really continuing to focus on how your brands can move from words of support to taking action and moving us into a better world and a better future is the key for any brand. No small feat, right? Easier said than done, maybe. So that's really the end of our webinar. I think we have a few questions. So we're going to actually we'll put our camera back on as we answer some of the questions. All right, so let's see what we got here. Jordan, there's a question specifically about gaming. Have you seen a growth in tabletop board games or RPG gaming in social conversation?
Hi, yes. So yes, we're definitely seeing a lot of conversation about gaming in general. Video games overall have been a big driver of the conversation. We mostly see a lot of Animal Crossing, which also amazing game, and just games that people can play together. So we haven't dug too much into board games, as the video gaming conversation has really been the star of that show. But we do see that desire to have activities where you can connect with people, whether that is like a board game at home or playing a game online, not just with like strangers, but being able to actually play a game with your friends or your family in other areas, or even people in the same city as you that you haven't been able to see. That's been a really big driver of that behavior.
Cool. There's another question, and Jennifer Torgerson, I think this would be good for you. In the earlier slides, based on what you've seen in other topics, could increasing calm simply be the result of increasing fatigue? In other words, less about attaining balance, but more about just giving up control. And I know you're seeing the emotions evolve real time in the Fresh Lab. So what are you thinking there?
Yeah, I mean, we have been seeing a increase in inertia. That's where we've been putting the feeling of tiredness. And so we have been seeing that, but we're also seeing the steadiness. So we're seeing people say, I'm tired, but then at the same time, they're also saying, but I feel okay. Like, I'm just tired of this going on, but today I don't feel overwhelmed. I don't feel panicked. I feel in control of things. So we are seeing, those go together.
Great. There's another question. I'd be very curious to see any of this, especially what people want from brands and some of the more tonal elements cut by Gen Z and millennials. Yeah, we absolutely can follow up with that. We have a lot of research from that context. I will say, top line, that obviously a lot of the things we talked about, where the expectations for brands to take a stance, the impact that has on purchase intent, that's obviously much higher when we look at it cut by Gen Z and millennials. Particularly with minorities as well as people in more urban settings. So not surprising, but definitely reiterated in the data as well. Okay. We had another question that said, can you share any additional details around what new activities people are planning for the holidays, like Thanksgiving or Christmas more specifically? Are you seeing anything in social or the community, Jennifer or Jordan? I don't know who wants to take that one.
I could speak to the community. I mean, what we're seeing there is, a little bit of mentions regarding doing crafts and decorations for the first time, but we're seeing more of an element of more, like more baking this year, more decorating, more holiday movies. Part of it is they have more time to do that, but, just more, as opposed to just in the past. I personally have checked the box, we did holiday cookies, we're done. But this year might become a weekly thing instead, so I think that's kind of where we're seeing the newness come.
And yeah, just to echo some of what Jennifer's seeing in communities on the social side, we did see a lot of the conversation around things like baking and these at-home activities as being really great ways to also like connect with your family at home and do something that's a bit more like meaningful and intentional, to spend your time instead of just being caught up in like the chaotic, getting through the day with the at-home schooling and working. So with the idea of like baking and these kind of holiday centric activities, those are things that are also just seen as a great way to also occupy your kids and do something to all stay busy together.
Awesome. We had one other question. What do the people stuck in early phases have in common demographically and psychographically? Offhand, I think demographically there weren't a lot of commonalities, but Jennifer, we could probably follow up with the person who asked this question. I think it's more behaviorally and psychographically, like just kind of how people are approaching their decision-making process. A lot of the things around the FOGO that Jennifer shared around where people are comfortable going and how they're making those kind of new rules of engagement. But we'll definitely follow up with the gentleman who asked that question as well. I think we're out of time, right, Ellen? Should probably wrap it up, huh?
Yeah, we are at time, and there are a lot more questions in there. So for everyone's question we didn't get to, you will receive an email in response, together with a link to today's recorded presentation. So thank you, Menaka, Jennifer, and Jordan. There was a lot of interest in today's presentation, and thank you everyone for joining us. Remember, there are some handouts and a recent point of view in our event console for you to download, so please go ahead and do that. That now concludes today's webinar. Have a wonderful day.
Everyone.